My name's Alex Pandolfo. I was born in Manchester into an Irish-Italian family 65 years ago. My birth, like the rest of my life, was a political experience. At that time, the Irish and Italians were treated abysmally as the immigrants, and it always sounds quite comical as white Mancunian to say that we were subject to racism at a very early age. I had to defend my two sisters and the family name, so to speak. So that kind of shaped my life and my ethics, and all my life I've been opposed to any form of inequality. And from being 16 and onwards, I've always been actively engaged in the trade union movement to try and put right social injustice and oppression. I've had a good life, I must be honest, I've had a good life. Parents was quite poor, like most people's were, but Dad never drank, and both Mum and Dad always put family first. We had a TV, I think we was the first people to have a TV on our estate, and people used to come around and watch it. We was probably the first people to have a car and go to Butlins for our holidays. So it was quite a good childhood. I've always enjoyed travelling. I've always been firstly independent. I was a teenager in the 60s and I love music. Again, that's something with the likes of Bob Dylan, Cat Stevens, Pete Seeger. The play Hair have helped shape my life and suited my political philosophy. So I've had a good life. I was expelled from school at 14 because I was in a retard class, as it was described then. Mum was told when I was expelled that I was just an idiot, I was a bad boy, and I would be in and out of prison all my life. I found that offensive because I didn't even give me the credit for doing something wrong and get away with it. So that was my schooling. Just jumping on a little while, I went to India, travelled round, went to Sweden and travelled, and I ended up working on the buses and being active in the Transport and General Workers Union, becoming a union rep, teaching on trade union courses, and towards the end of my 20s I won a scholarship to go to Ruskin College, Oxford, which changed my life considerably. I started teaching, again, trade union. I was teaching on law courses, but then changed track, I think more about my politics, because I realised that the education system was unfair. So I then started working on something called Access Courses, which was for people who were returning to education over 21, as they saw it for a second chance. When they finished the course, they realised it was the system that had failed them, rather than they'd failed the system. I then started looking more into psychology, philosophy, and moved into teacher training because I thought that was particularly important, particularly around areas of inclusive education, and to move away from people just being labelled SEN and looking at strong ways of involving them in mainstream education where that was possible.
Can you just tell us how it became apparent that there were issues to do with your health?
Yeah, there's been a lot of problems with my health, to be honest with you. I used to be a keen walker. I've walked John O'Groats Land's End, cycled it, walked Wainwright's Way, done lots of different walking activities. And I was with dementia. I was hit with gout, full body gout, which resulted in me not moving for 12 months and being on steroids. That led to heart disease, high blood pressure and underactive thyroid gland. All things that can't be cured but can be treated. And I managed to carry on working with that. It wasn't an issue, it was just times when it was impossible to move. But I wanted to carry on teaching. I was working in universities by then. But then I started to have problems with dates and times, and I would be reading dissertations and they weren't making much sense to me. I don't necessarily mean that was my fault. Some of them just didn't make sense. But it was very clear when I looked at the work, it wasn't plagiarised, it was set out correctly. I was getting to page 2 or 3 and not knowing what was going on. And I was also extremely tired. So there was problems arising, like I say, with reading and also writing. I was producing things on paper and on text, and they made perfect sense to me. When I was reading them, they looked fine, and I'd be sending them off. And I was getting comments back saying, I can't make head or tail of this, or I'd be getting a text back saying, there's a load of typos on this, what's the problem? And I was reading it and I'm thinking, well, I haven't got a clue what that says. But more disturbing than that, I couldn't remember what I was trying to say. I know you can make errors when you're typing, particularly on the phone, but you would generally remember what it was. So, given that I was on something like 26, 27 different tablets a day, I thought, well, it could be a medicine issue. Because I've been a vegan for 50 plus years, and have a B12 deficiency, which can also lead to memory loss, as can an underactive thyroid loss. Well, there's lots and lots of things that it could be. Because I'd also witnessed my father and other people with dementia, there was like alarm bells ringing there as well. I'm fortunate enough to have a really, really good GP in Lancaster. And I went round to see him, and he gave me the standard memory assessment, which I didn't do particularly good on. And what he said to me is, well, what we're going to do first of all is let's rule out the most severe, and we'll send you to the memory clinic or refer to the memory clinic. I got a call from the memory clinic, and it was a nurse. He did an assessment with me on the phone again. And he said, it's not particularly good. What we'd like to do is send you for a brain scan and then bring you into the memory clinic. And that was, again, fortunate because of where I live. That was like within a week or two. I had the scan on the Thursday and I had my appointment at the memory clinic on the Friday. So I turned up there, had another assessment, memory assessment, which was particularly bad, with the female nurse this time. And she left me sat in the reception area, and then she come back out and she said, well, we'd like to take you in now to see the psychiatrist. I went in to see the psychiatrist, and there was two nurses sat with the psychiatrist, and he said to me, are you on your own? Well, I just had this vision of the old judge putting the black cap on there, because when you see two nurses and somebody asks you if you're on your own, the news isn't going to be particularly good. So I explained, no, I'm on my own, but that's fine, that's okay. And he said that I'm just diagnosing you with Alzheimer's. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about that? The most disturbing part of that diagnosis wasn't the diagnosis, but what I said to him is, I'm gradually losing a lot of my mobility. And I've always had in my mind, when my mobility is to that level that I can't live independently, I can't have my own autonomy, that I would go to Switzerland for assisted dying. And in essence, the diagnosis of Alzheimer's had just sharpened that up. And this is what hurt me more than the diagnosis. He immediately diagnosed me as depressed. So he said, well, I'd also like to treat you for depression. So I said, I beg your pardon.
So he took your logical sort of long-term view as depression, with just based on purely that. Yeah.
Well, I've got more sense than to tell a psychiatrist that I'm not depressed, because that's denial immediately, isn't it? And it's more food for them, or more grounds for them to work with. So my response was, well, okay, I wasn't aware that I was depressed, but because of my background, I'm aware that the last person that could find out about that on occasions is a depressed person. Where do we go from here? So he said, well, I can treat the depression and I can treat the Alzheimer's with both of them with medication. What I can't do is give you both medication at the same time because of the counterindicators, which makes perfect sense. Both drugs that can provide it, so you'd need to know which particular one was causing the problem. But much to my surprise, he said, I'd like to treat the depression first. And again, so I thought, okay, this guy is reading my rational thoughts as an irrational suicide. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, well, okay, like I said earlier on, I wasn't aware of my depression. There's a number of events that have happened over the last 15 years or so in succession that could lead to depression. I understand and accept that. What I would argue is that if I have depression, it's reactive rather than any form of organic kind of depression. Now, as far as I am aware, you think there's medication that might slow down my dementia, but not cure it. Is that correct? So he said, well, yes. So I said, okay, depression, there's medication, but there's also talking therapies. Is that correct? And he said, yes. So I said, okay, so if I accept that I am depressed because of the events that have taken place over the last 15 years, possibly losing some of my skills, so a form of grief, losing skills could be involved in that. So it just strengthens my argument that it's reactionary. And given that I've got this diagnosis, and the Alzheimer's could be something that could exacerbate the depression, reactionary depression, and he agreed. So what I actually said to him then is, well, okay, it makes more sense to me that we go on the medication for the Alzheimer's, which may slow it down and give me some kind of psychological and physical relief, because the psychological imbalance can lead to physical problems. And I would prefer to go for speaking therapies for what you consider as depression, which he agreed with.
After the diagnosis, you continued with your thoughts and with your plans around assisted suicide. So can you talk me through the process? What happens when you go down that road?
Yeah, I've been a member of Life Circle and supported assisted dying for a long, long time. Clearly, my diagnosis, it sharpened it up somewhat. So apart from being a member, I then submitted an application for an assisted death in Basel. That started off with gathering together all documentation, so all the physical issues, challenges that I have, and the diagnosis from the psychiatrist and letters from my doctor about the Alzheimer's. So I packaged all that together, and I just did a small name, date of birth, where you live, etc. That I'd now got Alzheimer's, that this had sharpened up the need for me to apply for an assisted death, and literally emailed it off.
To Switzerland? To
Switzerland, yeah, to the centre in Basel. So I emailed that off. It was about 2 or 3 weeks later I got a email back from Erica Priestley, Dr. Erica Priestley, she's the president of Life Circle, saying that yes, we got all the medical information, everything is okay, we can see all the different conditions, plus the Alzheimer's is there. But what we'd like you to do now is a biography. Do you call it a biography? Autobiography, when you write about yourself, explaining where you come from, the things that you've done, the things that you like to do, and why you want an assisted death. So I said about that. The worst thing you can do is ask an academic to write something. She must have got about 7 or 8 pages.
Yeah.
And I went right back to birth, about the kind of things that I'd enjoyed, about the experiences with my father, how I didn't want to suffer the indignities, the lack of independence. I didn't want to face the paranoia, the fright, and then the violence that my father gave out to other people. And I just treasured the quality of my life. I think that was the issue, the quality of the life. And in essence, I summarised it by saying that I really want a humane, voluntary assisted death. I can't have that in my own country, unfortunately. So I want to come to Switzerland as the only option that I've got. But I will campaign. I had to finish work by then. I couldn't do anything with my work. I said I will vow now to spend every moment I can campaigning in England and around the UK to get the law changed on assisted dying.
And how complicated was it, the whole process in Switzerland? Was it, what you described sounds fairly administrative, really? It doesn't sound like a big sort of challenge.
It is quite complex. I mean, there's got to be the medical evidence, so that's quite easy to gather if you can get it.
Yeah.
Because I've come across people who, once they voiced that they want an assisted death, or they're considering an assisted death, the information's dried up and they've not been able to get access. I mean, you can get it eventually, but it can be a long, drawn-out process. Mm-hmm. So that can be a challenge in itself. But I think it's good that you've got to have this documentation because it's a good safeguard. Mm-hmm. I think the second part of it is the more difficult, where you've got to actually put on paper why you want an assisted death. That you've got to reflect on your life. You start thinking about your family, you think about your needs, and there's a number of things there. Within that document, I'm writing that my family have supported me, that my friends support me, etc. Though none of them want me to die, but then again, none of them want me to have Alzheimer's. So it's quite complex. So there's a lot of what you're writing that is the subtext that they're looking for. They're looking to see if there's any signs at all of I always get these two words mixed up these days. Coercion.
Yeah.
Sorry, coercion.
Yeah.
If there's any coercion taking place. So that's good, and it's essential, because that's limiting the amount of abuse that could possibly take place. And that is a hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do. They make sure that you're aware of how you do it. It is assisted dying, it's not euthanasia. So for example, when I go, there'll be an intravenous drip set up with the drugs in the drip. The only difference between what you may have in a hospital is, normally when you're in a hospital, if they want to administer anything, they twiddle the tube at the top. On this one, there'll be a slide, which I have to physically move. And that's somebody who doesn't want to kill themselves. It might sound morbid, this. I've had to practice that. Because you think, what I've got to do is deliberately move this tube, knowing that move the slide on the tube, knowing that immediately there's going to be drugs put into my body, that within seconds I'll fall into a deep sleep, and within minutes I'll be dead. So, that's an important part of it, because I think if you don't really want to do that, it's not going to take place. Now, the other part of the application is as well, I have to have a psych assessment. So I'm fortunate enough, because of my circle, I know a psychiatrist in London, Dr. Colin Brewer, who's been he's been a lifelong advocate of assisted dying. And I travelled down to London, and I had to get my capacity assessment off Colin, who typed it up, and he sent a copy off to Switzerland and a copy off to me. So that's another good safeguard to ensure that I've got capacity. And he spoke to me about dying, he spoke to me about illnesses, he talked to me about suicide, what my thoughts were on suicide, etc. And I explained that I'm fundamentally opposed to suicide, though I don't condemn people who commit suicide. I always say the person who's committed suicide, in the main, it's an irrational act where a person's probably been neglected by society and the systems that are in place. So it's that kind of discussion that goes on. And they talk about you dying, and I say, is it emotional? Well, of course it's emotional, but I don't want to die. I don't want the Alzheimer's. Now, it's a bit like Hobson's choice, isn't it? So the worst of two evils, the better of two evils in a sense, death, or being subject to something that I don't want to be.
When you talk about the slider on your arm and sort of introducing the drugs yourself, that assumes that you've got capacity, both mental and physical, to do that.
Yes.
Which means that the whole process has got to happen within that time. It's got to happen before you lose those faculties.
Absolutely, yeah.
So just talk me through that a little bit. And
well, I've already...
about the timing of the whole...
Yeah, sure. The timing of when I go is the most difficult thing for me, because I didn't expect to be here. We're now in January 2019. As I said earlier, when I was diagnosed 5 years ago, that's true, 4 years ago, in March. And I was told I had 4 or 5 years to live, though I could live beyond that, but I wouldn't know who I was, and I don't want that. So I kind of, because you've got to give yourself some date, you can't just go, I'll chance it. So I hadn't planned on being here now. I thought that at the end of 2018, early 2019, I would have gone to Switzerland. Thankfully, I've not deteriorated to the degree that I expected, so I've now put that back 12 months. But prior to going to Switzerland, when I picked the date to go to Switzerland, which is the difficult one, I just have to look for markers, indicators, how am I deteriorating, what's happening to me, etc. And when I decide the date, my psych assessment with Dr. Brewer was 3 years ago, which was fine to get my application. But prior to travelling to Switzerland, I have to go and have another psych assessment in England that's no more than 10 weeks old when I go to Switzerland. When I go to Switzerland, I have to be there 24, possibly 48 hours before my death. And the reason for that is I've been met on 2 occasions by doctors in Switzerland. Both of them will be assessing my capacity. They'll be talking to me about why have you come. I'll need to explain why I'm there. I'll have to explain that I know what the process is and demonstrate that I'm physically capable of moving the slide, that I am aware of what's going on. If there's any doubt in either those 2 interviews about my willingness, so to speak, to go through with that, and that it's anything other than my informed choice, the process will stop there and then, which again I think is a good thing. I think that's a really good thing. The day that I die, I will go to the centre, and it's pretty straightforward and practical. There's a few rooms. One's like a living room, and one's got, you can choose to sit on a chair or lie on a bed, etc. And already in the back there's a coffin already in the back waiting for you, which has been pre-organised. An important point: the police have already been informed. The police will have all my information, and they will have the details about my family and the information about anybody who travels with me. So they'll have all that information in advance. When, just say for argument's sake, I say 12 o'clock is my time that I wish to die. Just moments before that, the intravenous strip will be set up, the slide will be there, and again I hope it's Erica, but whoever who's performing the procedure will then ask me my name. It's on camera, so from there onwards I'm on camera. So it's on camera, and I will be asked my name, my date of birth, why have I come to Switzerland, am I aware of what's in my arm, am I aware what will happen once I move that slide, and I have to say yes. Once the slide opens, I will die. It's my choice to do this, and I'll probably thank Erica very much for providing the service. Once I've died, I'll be removed, but then the whole procedure, everything that's on camera, is then passed on to the police. Now, I'm not sure if it's 6 or 8 hours. So, for example, like I say, if I said 12 o'clock, and everyone who comes with me, the people who come tend to go home that same night. But you're not allowed to leave the country for either 6 or 8 hours. I'd have to check that for accuracy. That's to ensure that the police can look through everything, and they're satisfied that there's been no indiscretions, or there's been no attempt to cajole somebody into do it, and it was an act of assisted suicide, which I think is all good, because the more safeguards there are, the better it is. And it's that model that's practiced in Switzerland, and has been practiced for 7 decades without blemish. Now, there's been cases taken, and if there hadn't been, I'd be a bit worried, but there's been cases taken against Life Circle and Dignitas, but nothing has come from them. And that is a perfect model for me, because unlike Dignity in Dying, and unlike the Oregon model, where they campaign for anybody that's got 6 months to live, or with a terminal illness, can qualify for it, I think that's obscure. I think that's bad, because there's lots of people with degenerative illnesses that will have years of unwanted suffering that they don't want, years of unwanted suffering that can't be cured, that can't be particularly managed and cared for in a dignified way. And by the time I've got 6 months left to live, I won't have capacity, so I won't even qualify for it, and all my suffering will have taken place.
Talking about purely practical points, when you're dead, are you cremated and your remains stay in Switzerland, or do they come back to the UK? What happens then?
Immediately taken away by the undertaker. I think they give about an hour or so for anybody that wants to stay behind, etc. That's not my problem. That's for those who were there, isn't it? That's the thing about death, isn't it? So it's not about the dead person in the main, it's about how are people recovering and responding from it. So I think there's a minimum of an hour. I might be wrong on that. It may be longer if it's required. But yeah, the undertakers come, put you in the coffin, take you away and cremate it. Now you've got two options there. Either your remains can stay in Switzerland. I don't give a tinker where they're going, but again, you know, for help people through the grief process, if somebody wants my remains, they've got two options. With the price of 10,000 Swiss euros, which works out about 7,250, 7,500 pounds thereabouts, that's the most expensive you can pay for it. And that includes a certain amount of your ashes being sent back. This is where it gets complicated, and I don't understand the ins and outs of it. There's so many grams can be sent back by post, which is postal cost.
Right, okay.
And that can be sent directly to you.
That one up then.
Yeah.
So
if you want the whole of the ashes sending, which the bulk of that's going to be wood anyway, isn't it?
yeah.
If you want that, the whole of it sending, then it gets expensive, because then it has to be done via an undertaker in Switzerland, delivered to an undertaker in England, and then delivered back to the people who want it. Now that probably going to cost about £3,000 or £4,000. If anyone wants to spend that, in fact, I don't know anybody that's got that type of money to waste on ashes. So if anybody wants it, take what comes and share it out. If they want to pay for more, by all means, pay for it.
And can we talk about the financial side of things?
Yeah, of course.
We're talking that it costs around about £7,500 for the whole process.
Yes.
And at what point do you pay that money?
You pay when I choose a date. I would. You can't just phone up and say, "Can I come tomorrow?" Obviously, it's so I'd phone up tomorrow, for example, and say, "Okay, I'd like to fix a date for April the 11th, my birthday." That would really wrap people off no ends. Remember my birth and my death. It says remember other dates, doesn't it? It was to choose April the 11th. I would then send off, I think it's about £2,000 deposit. And 2 weeks, I think it's 2 weeks prior to my assisted death, I will transfer the remainder of the money over.
Right. So, comparatively speaking to an ordinary funeral in the UK, it's quite competitive, really, isn't it?
Good value, isn't it? Yeah, I know. Well, people say to me, it's outrageous that you've got to pay that much money. So I said, well, you know, there's a few things you need to take into consideration. The drugs are probably the cheapest part of it. Then the drugs probably cost £1,000 or something like that. If that, I don't know. But when you think Switzerland isn't the cheapest place to live, and the cost of running that centre must be astronomical. Mm-hmm. The thing I like about Life Circle is it's a non-profit making organisation. People are getting wages, but they do also fund campaigning in other countries. And Erica Presley would tell you if she was here, she doesn't like having to assist people's death in Switzerland. What she would much be happier doing is coming to England and supporting GPs, etc., on how to do assisted death. So, you know, some of that money is going to go back into the movement, in my terminology, which is a good thing. So there's the price of that. There's 3 doctors at least involved in that process over 3 days, which is good. And, you know, like you said, the cost of a cremation, I can't see you getting the simplest cremation in this country, funeral. It's got to be £3,000-4,000, I would imagine.
Right. So
Yeah, so it's quite good, isn't it?
so that's all got to be taken into account. But so
I don't know if I can get a buy one and get one free offer off them or anything like that.
anyone that's involved in the process, I think the big fear is in the UK that anyone who's involved in the process of supporting someone, maybe travelling with you, might then get caught up in something that comes afterwards in terms of their liability and their guilt or whatever. So, are there any concerns in that direction?
I've not asked anybody to come with me. I haven't asked anybody to come with me. And I mean, I've got a really close friend that I've known 45 years, and you know, somebody I met when I was working on the buses, and you know, so we're still friends, and I still talk to him virtually every day. Now he supports my right to make that choice 100%, but he finds it difficult to talk about it with me. He's talk abstract about assisted dying is fine, but he can't talk about mine because it's just too emotional for him. And I accept that. So there is that issue. And I watched my dad die. And I found that a privilege, to be honest with you. And using a religious term, which I'm not, it was a blessing because of the suffering that I'd watched him through. And I thought it was a lovely thing just to watch him finally go. I've seen people killed in road accidents, and I still have nightmares about that. So I understand that death can mean different things to different people. So I would never say, I want you to come for these reasons. I wouldn't do that. So I've never said, will you come with me? I've probably got about 8 or 9 people who want to come. You know, so we're going to have to work that one out. Now, the problem with that, of course, is as the Suicide Act stands in England, phoning up Switzerland, arranging transport for me and coming with me to Switzerland is actually an offence under the Suicide Act. To commit suicide isn't a criminal offence, but to assist somebody is. Now that can be a problem. And what I should say is that I would not want to see that Suicide Act changed. I think the Suicide Act should remain as it is, because that is about suicides and somebody perhaps killing somebody under the guise of it. So that needs to remain in place. I want separate legislation. But what it does do is it brings a couple of hypocrisies up and contradictions within England. So there was a case of Diane Petty earlier on this century. And she was a great woman, and she campaigned for assisted dying in this country, and she didn't get it. But what happened after her case is the Crown Prosecution Service decided that it wasn't in the public interest to prosecute anybody that helps or goes to Switzerland with somebody, provided it was done with good intent. Well, that can all be documented through, like, all my information. It's very clear from my documentation to Life Circle what my wants are, the fact that I go around speaking at public meetings, the fact that I've been in umpteen different newspapers. So my wishes are extremely clear. So anybody that accompanies me wouldn't actually be prosecuted. Now, whilst the government says that it's immoral and illegal to assist the suicide and to introduce assisted dying laws would be wrong, what they're actually doing there is what I call a blind eye policy and farming out assisted dying to those who can afford it. So if you can afford the £7,500 plus travel, you can go. Most socially and economically deprived in this country can't go. Now that's an hypocrisy, and it's discrimination. And if it's legally right and it's morally right and ethically correct for people to assist and for people to go to Switzerland, then you've got to ask the question, how isn't it in England? The second thing where there's the hypocrisy is I wear a Mediaid band, and I have filled in, with the support of my doctor, an advanced statement. And what that means is, if I have an accident or I get suddenly taken ill with something that without medical intervention I will die, then they don't intervene, which could mean a long, prolonged death. Now, a long, prolonged death, I watched my dad go through a long, prolonged death, and it wasn't nice. I've got lots of contacts via the Right to Die with Dignity UK, an organisation that I'm part of. People who have watched there and videos of people suffering. It's not nice. It's not nice for the family, it's not nice for the person. As a trade unionist, I don't think it's nice for the health workers, the health professionals that have got to sit by and watch that. But that's morally acceptable. I was speaking at a meeting at the hospital, a lunchtime meeting for health workers. I think it was like 30 odd people there. Only 2 of them dissented, both on religious grounds. But one doctor who